February 18th, 2026. Iran just shut the Strait of Hormuz. Not a drill, not a warning shot, not a bluff. It actually happened. Within hours, the United States responded by moving F-22 Raptors and 18 F-35 stealth fighters into direct striking range of Iranian territory. These aren't patrol aircraft. F-22s and F-35s get deployed like this for one reason, because someone is seriously considering using them. And at the same time, 2 American aircraft carriers are sitting in the Arabian Sea right now, USS Abraham Lincoln and USS Gerald R. Ford. 2 carrier strike groups in the same region? That hasn't happened since the Iraq War in 2003. Washington is not bluffing. But here's what makes February 18th, 2026 genuinely different from every other Iran crisis the world has watched unfold over the last 2 decades. Iran didn't just threaten to close the strait this time, they actually did it. And that changes everything about what happens next. Let's start with the strait itself, because most people don't grasp what closing Hormuz actually means for the world. The Strait of Hormuz is 33 kilometers wide at its narrowest point. Iran controls the northern shore. Oman controls the southern shore. There's no alternative passage for supertankers. None. Every barrel of oil leaving Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Kuwait, Iraq, and Qatar goes through that choke point. That's 21 million barrels of oil per day. Roughly 20% of the entire world's oil supply moving through a stretch of water you could swim across. When Iran closes that strait, it doesn't just hurt the United States. It hits Europe, Asia, and every economy on the planet that runs on energy. The price of oil has already jumped 14% in the last 6 hours alone, and that is not a market overreaction. That's the market pricing in the very real possibility that this standoff does not resolve quickly, or cleanly, or peacefully. Lloyd's of London raised war risk premiums for vessels in the region by 400% overnight. Several tankers already en route have turned around. The economic damage is starting in real time before a single shot has been fired. That's how serious this choke point is. Now let's talk about why the F-22 and F-35 deployment matters so much more than any typical show of force in this region. The F-22 Raptor is the only operational 5th-generation air superiority fighter in the world with full stealth capability. Iranian radar systems cannot reliably track it. The S-300 batteries Russia sold Iran, the domestically built Bavar 373 systems, none of them were designed for this. The F-35 adds a completely different dimension. It can suppress enemy air defenses, hit hardened underground targets, and run ISR missions simultaneously. When you combine 18 F-35s with F-22 Escort and position them in Qatar and the UAE, which is exactly where Pentagon sources confirmed they are, you have a strike package. The Pentagon has officially declined to comment, but 3 defense officials, speaking on background, confirmed the positioning to major U.S. outlets this morning. And the timing is not coincidental. These aircraft didn't arrive overnight. They've been pre-positioned for weeks as Geneva talks stalled and Iranian rhetoric escalated. This crisis didn't materialize from nowhere. It has been building since Trump returned to office and immediately relaunched the maximum pressure campaign against Iran. Sanctions were tightened. Iranian oil exports were targeted again. And on January the 2nd, 2026, Trump publicly threatened to come to the rescue of Iranian protesters. Tehran interpreted that language as a direct threat to the regime's survival. And Iran's response since then has been methodical and deliberate. In January 2026, the IRGC ran a major naval exercise in the strait officially called Smart Control of the Strait of Hormuz. Iranian state media described it as a demonstration of the ability to rapidly and decisively respond to security threats. That exercise was a rehearsal. Today is the performance. The closure of Hormuz on February 18th also lands in the middle of active nuclear negotiations in Geneva. That is not an accident. Iran has been signaling for months that if talks collapsed without meaningful sanctions, escalation would follow. This appears to be that escalation, a pressure move, designed to force Washington's hand before military action becomes the default option on the table. But here's where things get genuinely dangerous, because this situation creates conditions where miscalculation becomes catastrophically easy. An Iranian fast boat that gets too close to a U.S. destroyer, a patrol aircraft that strays into disputed airspace, a communications failure between commanders. In a crisis environment this tense, any one of those incidents can trigger a chain of events that nobody actually intended to start. The IRGC Navy has hundreds of small, fast attack craft positioned throughout the strait right now. These vessels have harassed U.S. Navy ships repeatedly over the last decade. In a straight conventional naval confrontation in open water, the United States wins decisively, and every commander in Tehran knows it. It just needs to create enough chaos and uncertainty to make the cost of military action look worse than the cost of cutting a deal. Saudi Arabia convened an emergency cabinet meeting this morning. The UAE raised its military readiness level. Netanyahu spoke with Trump by phone earlier today. Israeli media reports Netanyahu pressed for immediate action against Iranian nuclear facilities. The entire region is moving fast and in one direction. And there is one more layer to all of this, a layer that most analysts aren't talking about yet, that we'll break down in part 2. Because 2 days ago, on February 16th, the Taliban stood up and offered military cooperation to Iran if the United States attacks. The Taliban, the organization America fought for 20 years, volunteering to help Iran. That changes the strategic picture in ways Washington hasn't fully processed yet. But right now, on the morning of February 18th, 2026, here's exactly where things stand and why every move matters. Iran has closed the Strait of Hormuz. 2 carrier strike groups are in position. F-22s and 18 F-35s are within striking range. Oil markets are in freefall. And the question that every capital in the world, Washington, Tehran, Riyadh, Jerusalem, Beijing, is asking right now is the same one. Is this a pressure tactic designed to force a deal, or has the calculation already shifted towards something far more dangerous? Drop your answer in the comments. Do you think Trump pulls the trigger on Iran and hit like, if this breakdown matters to you, it genuinely helps get this to more people? Here's what most people don't understand about the Strait of Hormuz. Iran doesn't actually need to sink a single ship to win this confrontation. All they have to do is make the insurance companies nervous enough, and the global shipping industry grinds to a halt on its own, and that's already happening. As of this morning, February 18th, 2026, 3 major shipping companies have suspended transits through the strait indefinitely. That's not a military victory for Iran. That's an economic one. And the most dangerous part is it costs them almost nothing to achieve. But let's talk about what Iran actually has positioned in that strait right now, because this is where most analysts consistently get it wrong. Everyone focuses on the big weapons, the missiles, the submarines, the naval vessels. And yes, those matter. But the real threat is the small stuff. The IRGC Navy operates what military analysts call a swarm doctrine. Hundreds of small, fast attack craft, cheap, expendable, and incredibly hard to defend against. In a 2002 Pentagon war game called Millennium Challenge, a simulated Iranian swarm attack sank 16 U.S. Navy vessels in the span of a single morning. The exercise was so embarrassing that the Pentagon halted it, reset the board, and changed the rules so the U.S. side would win. That's not a joke. That actually happened. The point is this. Iran has spent 20 years studying exactly how to neutralize American naval superiority in a confined waterway like Hormuz. They've mapped every current, every depth, every blind spot in U.S. radar coverage. The strait is their home turf, and they've been preparing for this moment for decades. Now layer on top of that the mines. Iran has one of the largest naval mine stockpiles in the world, estimated at over 2,000 mines of various types. Some are contact mines, old technology but still lethal. Others are modern influence mines that detonate in response to a ship's magnetic signature or acoustic profile. A single well-placed minefield in the strait's shipping lane could shut down commercial traffic for weeks, even after a ceasefire. Clearing mines is slow, dangerous, and expensive. The U.S. Navy's mine countermeasure capability has actually shrunk significantly since the Cold War. It is one of the most quietly acknowledged vulnerabilities in the entire fleet. So when Iran says they've closed the strait, they're not just talking about parking a frigate in the middle of the channel. They're talking about a layered denial strategy, mines in the shipping lanes, fast boats ready to swarm, anti-ship missiles on the northern coastline, submarines positioned at the exits, all of it activated simultaneously. Here's the thing that should concern Washington most right now. Iran doesn't need this strategy to last forever. They just need it to last long enough. Long enough for oil prices to hit $150 a barrel, and for European governments to start demanding de-escalation. Long enough for the economic pressure to completely flip the political calculus in Washington and make a deal look better than a war. Because here's what the energy dependency map actually looks like for America's closest treaty partners and key allies right now. Japan imports 90% of its oil through the Strait of Hormuz. South Korea, 70%. India, roughly 60%. These are not adversaries. These are treaty partners, trading partners, countries whose economies are directly tied to that 33-kilometer choke point staying open. Every hour the strait stays closed, those governments are on the phone with Washington. And not to cheer America on, to demand a resolution. That's the Iranian strategy in its purest form. Don't fight the U.S. military directly. Make the U.S. military's allies fight Washington's political will to act. And so far, on day one of the closure, it is working almost exactly the way Tehran's strategic planners calculated. The European Union has already called for immediate diplomatic engagement. China, which imports more Gulf oil than anyone, has urged restraint from all sides. Now let's talk about what the United States can actually do here, because the options are more complicated than they look on a cable news chyron. Option 1 is the naval escort approach, U.S. warships physically escorting commercial tankers through the strait under armed protection. This is what America did during the tanker war with Iran in 1987 and 1988. It worked then, but the threat environment was nothing like today. Iran's anti-ship missile capability in 1987 was minimal to non-existent. Today, it is one of the most sophisticated regional arsenals in the world. The Noor missile, the Qadr, the Khalij Fars, a ballistic missile specifically engineered to hit moving ships at sea. Iran has publicly tested these weapons against vessel targets. This is not theoretical capability on paper. It is fully documented. Escorting tankers through a strait where ballistic missiles are pre-positioned on the opposite coastline is a fundamentally different proposition than it was 40 years ago. Option 2 is the one nobody wants to say out loud. Strike the missile batteries, destroy Iran's coastal defense infrastructure, force the strait back open by eliminating the threat. That's what the F-22s and F-35s are positioned to execute right now. On paper, the U.S. military can absolutely do this. American air power is in a completely different category from anything Iran can put in the sky. That part is simply not in dispute. But here's what that strike actually triggers. Iran has publicly committed to closing the strait permanently if attacked. Not temporarily, permanently. And Iran has substantial ground forces pre-positioned specifically to back that commitment up in the event of any American strike. IRGC infantry units are dug in along the northern coastline to counter any attempt to clear the shore-based missile launchers. You can destroy the missiles from the air, but you can't hold the coastline from the air. And as long as Iran controls that northern shore, they can reload and reposition. This is the problem that every U.S. war planner has been wrestling with for 30 years, and nobody has solved it cleanly. Not on paper, not in exercises, not in real life. Option 3 is what's happening right now in Geneva. Negotiate. Use the economic pressure of a closed strait against Iran the same way they're using it against the West. Because here's the part that doesn't get enough attention. Iran's economy cannot absorb a prolonged confrontation either. Inflation is running above 40%, and the Iranian rial has lost more than 80% of its value over 5 years. That is serious internal pressure. The Iranian public is not uniformly behind this escalation. There have been significant protests in Tehran, Isfahan, and Mashhad in recent months over economic conditions. A regime that is already struggling to maintain domestic legitimacy cannot afford a prolonged military confrontation that tanks the economy further. That's leverage, real leverage, and that's exactly why the Geneva talks matter, because both sides have something to lose here and both sides know it. But let's be honest about what makes the diplomatic path so fragile right now, because it only takes one incident to collapse it entirely. Think carefully about what that actually means with both sides operating at maximum combat alert on the water right now. One IRGC speedboat captain who makes the wrong call, one breakdown in communication where every system is already stretched to its absolute limit. The Strait of Hormuz, on February 18, 2026, is sitting one single miscalculation away from becoming a full active battlefield. And once it starts, history is very clear. The question of how it ends becomes dramatically harder than how it started. In Part 3, we are going to break down exactly what a full U.S. military strike package against Iran would actually look like. The targets, the timeline, and the one critical factor that military planners are not publicly discussing, but absolutely should be. Here's what nobody in Washington wants to say out loud right now. A military strike on Iran is not a simple operation. It never was. Iran is not Libya. It is not Syria. It is not Iraq in 2003, where American forces crossed a desert and reached Baghdad in 3 weeks. Iran is a country of 83 million people, 1.6 million square kilometers, and 40 years of military infrastructure built specifically to survive an American air campaign. Let's talk about what a real U.S. strike package against Iran would actually have to look like. Because the public version of this conversation is missing most of the complexity. The first and most urgent priority for any U.S. strike package would be taking down Iran's integrated air defense network completely and immediately. You cannot send strike aircraft into Iranian airspace without neutralizing the S-300 batteries and the Bavar 373 systems first. That alone is a major operation. Iran has these systems distributed across multiple sites, hardened, redundant, and connected to a centralized command network. Suppressing Iranian air defenses would require a sustained electronic warfare campaign, anti-radiation missiles targeting radar systems, and cruise missile strikes on command nodes. All of that happens before a single bomb lands on a nuclear facility, and all of it signals to Tehran and to the world that the strike is coming. Here's the thing about Iran's nuclear program that most people don't fully understand. The most critical facilities are not sitting in the open waiting to be hit. Fordo is buried under 80 meters of solid mountain. It was specifically engineered to survive conventional airstrikes. Even the GBU-57 massive ordnance penetrator, the most powerful bunker-busting bomb in the U.S. arsenal, would need multiple direct hits to have a reasonable chance. And Fordo is not the only hardened site. Natanz has deeply buried centrifuge halls. Isfahan has dispersed facilities. The Iranians watched what happened to Iraq's Osirak reactor in 1981 and spent the next 4 decades building so that could never happen to them. This is why the F-35s matter so much in this specific context. They can carry precision munitions and penetrate defended airspace. But even they have hard limits against deeply buried, reinforced concrete at those depths. No aircraft eliminates that problem entirely. The honest assessment from multiple former U.S. defense officials is that airstrikes could set Iran's nuclear program back by 2 to 3 years at most. Not eliminate it, not end it, set it back. And in exchange for that window, every retaliatory mechanism Iran has built gets triggered. And in exchange for that 2 to 3 year window, the United States would be triggering every retaliatory mechanism Iran has spent 4 decades building. Let's be specific about what Iranian retaliation actually looks like, because this is the calculation that matters most right now. Within hours of any U.S. strike, Hezbollah in Lebanon activates. They have an estimated 150,000 rockets and missiles pointed at Israel. A significant portion of those are precision-guided. Israel's Iron Dome and David's Sling systems would face a volume of fire they have never been tested against. The Houthis in Yemen resume attacks on Red Sea shipping immediately. They already demonstrated in 2024 that they can disrupt global maritime trade routes for months at a time. Shia militias in Iraq begin targeting U.S. bases in the region. There are still approximately 2,500 American troops in Iraq. They become targets within the first 24 hours. And Iran itself fires ballistic missiles. In April 2024, Iran launched over 300 drones and missiles at Israel in a single night. That was a calibrated, deliberately limited demonstration. A full wartime launch against U.S. bases and assets would look completely different in scale. Here's what that specific vulnerability actually means for the 2 American carrier strike groups positioned in the Arabian Sea right now. The USS Abraham Lincoln and USS Gerald R. Ford are extraordinary assets, but they are also large, trackable, and operating in a geographically confined body of water. Iran has invested heavily and consistently over decades in what military strategists call anti-access and area denial capability. That means the specific capability to threaten large surface vessels at range, using ballistic missiles, cruise missiles, and fast attack swarms operating together. The Khalij Fars ballistic missile that Iran has publicly tested on camera was specifically engineered and designed to strike moving aircraft carriers at sea. Multiple senior defense analysts have flagged carrier vulnerability in the Persian Gulf as one of the most serious and underappreciated risks in the entire scenario. This doesn't mean the U.S. military can't operate there. It means the cost calculation is more complicated than it appears from the outside looking in. So where does that leave things on February 18th, 2026? With F-22s and F-35s in position, 2 carriers in the sea, and Iran's strait closure now in its first full day. The military options on the table are real, and the F-22s and F-35s already in position make absolutely clear that Washington is serious about them. But the retaliatory risks are equally real, and the diplomatic track in Geneva remains the only path without a significant probability of full regional escalation. That is the precise equation sitting on the president's desk on the morning of February 18th, 2026, with no easy answers anywhere. In the final part, we are going to talk about how this most likely resolves, and the one outcome that almost nobody is publicly gaming out yet. Here's the question that every analyst, every diplomat, and every military planner is actually trying to answer right now. How does this end? Because history is very specific on one thing. Crises like this one don't resolve the way anyone plans. They resolve the way pressure forces them to. Let's look at the realistic outcomes, because there are really only 3 paths forward from where things stand on February 18th, 2026. The first path is a diplomatic deal in Geneva. Iran agrees to verifiable limits on its nuclear program in exchange for meaningful sanctions relief. The strait reopens, the carriers return to port, the crisis de-escalates without a single shot fired, and the world moves on. This is the outcome that both sides technically want, but neither side can accept on the other's terms. That gap is exactly why we're at this point in the first place. The second path is a limited U.S. strike, surgical, targeted, focused on nuclear infrastructure and air defense systems. Iran retaliates in a calibrated way. Both sides step back. An uneasy ceasefire holds and diplomacy resumes from a position of mutual exhaustion. This is the scenario that Washington war planners would most prefer if the diplomatic track in Geneva fails completely. But calibrated Iranian retaliation is an assumption, not a guarantee. And in warfare, assumptions are where campaigns go wrong. The third path is the one nobody in any capital wants to say out loud. Escalation that neither side fully controls or can stop. A strike leads to a counterstrike. A counterstrike leads to a broader exchange. The region ignites, and the exit becomes impossible to find. History has a long record of conflicts that started with surgical intentions and ended somewhere nobody planned for. Iraq, Libya, Lebanon in 1982. Every single time, the assumption of a clean, limited operation turned out to be wrong. Here's what makes this moment different from every previous Iran crisis. And this is the part most people are missing entirely. Iran is not isolated the way it was in 2012 or 2018. It has deepened military ties with Russia and signed a strategic partnership with China. And as of 2 days ago, the Taliban has publicly offered military cooperation. The regional picture has fundamentally shifted. That doesn't mean Russia or China fight alongside Iran. It means the diplomatic and economic pressure the West can bring to bear has hard limits that didn't exist before. And Trump knows this, which is why the most likely outcome, if you read the actual signals, is a deal both sides can frame as a win. Not a perfect deal and not a permanent solution, but something each government can credibly sell to its own domestic audience as a form of victory. Iran reopens the strait and gets partial sanctions relief. The U.S. claims maximum pressure worked. Tehran claims it forced America to the table. Both sides save face. The region exhales. It won't be a perfect deal. It won't eliminate Iran's nuclear capability. It won't resolve the underlying tensions that have defined this relationship for 45 years. But it will avoid a war that nobody, not Washington, not Tehran, not Riyadh, not Beijing, is actually prepared to manage the consequences of. That is the most probable outcome. Not because the players are wise, but because the alternative is too costly for everyone simultaneously. The Strait of Hormuz will reopen because both sides need it to. The F-22s and F-35s will return to base, the carriers will resume their patrol, and the underlying crisis will remain exactly where it has always been, unresolved, dangerous, and waiting for the next flashpoint to bring us all back here. That's the reality of February 18th, 2026. Not a war, not a resolution. A managed confrontation between two sides that both blinked and both know it.